All right, I will call this meeting to order. Dan, can we get a roll call, please?
Yep, Councilmember Bain.
Here.
Councilmember Husnick.
Here.
Councilmember Eigner.
Here.
Councilmember Freer.
Here.
And Mayor Winnick.
Here. Ask everyone to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Look for an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. And can we get the open forum sign-up sheet, please? Thanks, Dan. Peter?
It's a short list, Mr. Mayor.
Do you, 7C, do you want to defer till we come up with that?
I wasn't sure whatever you'd prefer. It doesn't matter to me.
Well, you're the only one on the list, so we can wait till 7C comes up and bring you up here then.
That'd be great.
All right.
Thank you.
So we're moving on to the consent agenda. I'll look for a motion or changes.
Mr.
Mike?
Mayor, I move the consent agenda, removing items B and items F
And K.
and K. Okay.
All right. We have a motion. Do we have a second on that?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Item 6B.
Mr. Mayor, I choose to abstain on this one, so the witch hunt is over, so I'm not going to vote for it.
All right. So we'll look for action on 6B. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting on October 2nd.
Second.
All right. Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And abstain.
Abstain.
All right. Going on to 6F.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to make sure that I understood that this is the agreement where MnDOT is agreeing to pay 15% additional, and that the city's portion essentially goes up to $741,270 for 62. Is that the final amount after MnDOT is paid, or is that? I thought it was supposed to be lower than that after MnDOT, because I thought what I had heard was about 400,000 total for the city.
No, Mayor, members of council, that number is correct. And so what you have is the original amount that was committed, which was $300,000. You had, these are real approximate numbers now, but you had approximately $800,000 in overage due to that change order. And then MnDOT's willing to come in and pay a share of that, but that'll still leave the city with approximately $400,000 additional cost. So
That's 500, almost 500,000. It's 485,000.
yeah, the net cost is that $741,274.
Okay. And then, yeah, I know we have a special meeting, so I'll save the rest for later.
Okay, do we want to have a motion on 6F?
Clarification, Aaron, we are meeting about potential litigation on this evening, correct?
That's not correct.
Okay.
So we had previously met on that. We're in a situation where, based on that guidance, we elected to proceed with a grant adjustment that MnDOT was agreeable to, and that's what this action really is here tonight, is the maximum amount of money that MnDOT is willing to contribute to the project. And what was required based on the change order for the project. We've had a preliminary settlement meeting, but we don't have any further, specific asks of the council. There wasn't necessarily a lot of movement in that initial discussion. So the item for the closed session is unrelated.
Is there a time component for this ask for the grant that we need to pursue this now? Or what is the risk of waiting until we have a little further clarification on next steps?
Well, I mean, I think really the question on that is there a situation where this is going to be different? And I would say the answer to that question is no. So this is what MnDOT is willing to do. And so it's just a function of whether we want to move ahead and process that. They're kind of a neutral in this whole situation, and this is what they're willing to do.
But also, if you wait, there's a chance they may renege on this too, right?
There is funding commitments, and so, yeah, I mean, there is potential exposure. That's a good point.
Yeah, you want to move forward with that. There's no question about it.
Another,
Where's the funding coming from at this point? This additional money coming from? I know we already paid this, but where did it come from?
Yeah, it's within the general fund at this point. Well, currently, I guess that's a point that remains to be discussed. The funding for this project was accounted for in a capital project fund specific for the project, and so that'll have to be reconciled. But the working idea is it's a liability of the general fund. I mean, they have to close the gap somehow.
So, and that fund is sitting today with a negative fund balance. That's what needs to be reconciled
Correct,
in the
yeah.
future. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's a policy discussion we'll have to have at some point.
Was your question the funding from where did we pay, or where is the funding for the grant coming from?
Funding from where we paid. Yep.
Okay. Go ahead, Ed.
okay, as far as pending litigation though, we could be made whole, right? As far as getting us back to the original $3 million.
That's our effort. Certainly, when you go into these discussions, you're
Accepting this has no bearing on that.
No.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'll look for motion on 6F.
I'll make a motion that we accept the terms that are spelled out in the airport grant contract amendment.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
All right, motion carries. And Donovan, just quick clarification on 6K, this abatement. There are a couple of dumpster-type bag things in this person's yard, or?
Correct. I mean, I can show you a photo if you want to see, but there's a number of bags. They're located, looks like the renter moved out. I've been in contact 3 times with him regarding their removal. He promised 2 Saturdays ago that he would call Waste Management to have that scheduled. It's still my intention to follow up with him and the property owner to not do this, but given the scheduling with city council meetings, I wanted to put this on the agenda to allow this, council to authorize this if they choose, saw fit, in order to make sure they got cleaned up.
Aren't those paid for before they buy them?
It's my understanding they're not bagsters, they're Waste Management, or else, I've done a bagster this year, so I would have just simply called the number and said, come pick them up.
Yeah.
But it's my understanding that that fee has not been paid for their removal.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I'll look for motion on 6K. Do we have a motion,
All right, I'll make the motion that we go with Donovan's recommendations for the abatement of 728 Woodland.
or? All right, thank you. Do we have a second on
I'll
that?
second.
All those in favor? Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Donovan, clarification, how long has it been?
It's a number of weeks. I believe they were there before we got the report, about almost 2 weeks ago now,
So it's been about a month or so, approximately?
approximately, yes.
And have you sent letters or anything like that?
I had 3 phone calls with the son of the renter. It appears that the renter has some personal circumstances, and I have not talked to him. But I talked to the son, who, basically claimed ownership and said money was coming. He was going to call Waste Management. I sent a letter to property owner on Wednesday, so they should have received it, not Saturday, but today. We didn't have a phone number on record with, or other means to reach the owner.
Is all of the garbage within a contained structure, and it's the problem is with the structure, or is this overflowing and there's garbage throughout the yard?
It's my understanding of, that they're basically within these bags, so that it's not strewn apart across the whole yard presently, but part of the complaint is that it's blowing out of these onto other people's property, and so they're picking up things.
Any further discussion?
The timeline is compressed. I'm nervous or uncomfortable with the timeline. I mean, I can go deep on this. So we have ordinance for other structures, roll-off structures. I mean, my yard could be in non-compliance with roll-off structures at any given point in our project. So what does the ordinance today say?
Ordinance, by the strict text, just says violation is a violation. And, the city litigator says we're doing people a courtesy by informing them and asking them to clean up. And generally, we follow something along of, 2 letters over 6 weeks, and then the final, you must address this immediately, final letter.
We haven't.
After. And so this is compressed, correct? But it also seemed like there's also a letter a note on the door saying that they moved out, and it seems like it's not going to be addressed, like I would take, like as an owner there, as someone I can keep contacting. And so given that, I thought a different approach was needed.
I'd like to withdraw my second. I would prefer we table until further time has passed. Give some more time for staff to work with the property owner.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful because Jay's got some questions, so we'll work through that too.
Well,
right.
I'll withdraw the motion then.
Do we have a move to table?
Motion to table.
Second.
All right.
Discussable, huh?
Oh, I guess it's not discussable, so. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I wanted to have my question before you table. That's all right.
All right. That brings us to the regular agenda. Item A, Donovan.
Your Honor, I'll take that one. We're going to ask the council to table this particular item for this evening. The Planning Commission did approve the Anoka Hennepin Credit Union site plan appeal or approval with a condition that a landscape plan be finalized subject to approval by city staff. There was concerns expressed at the Planning Commission hearing about the visibility to the adjacent property, which has Anytime Fitness and Dollar Tree, et cetera, and they wanted some time to work through that. We did come to a consensus this morning on the landscape plan adjustment that the parties can agree upon. Took a little bit of time for us to get there, but we do have a consensus landscape plan. We just need to amend some documents that will memorialize that and get the plan revised. And so the appellant, Tiba Realty, has requested the council to, and the group concurs with the request of the council to table this. And hopefully between now and the next council meeting, then they would likely withdraw their appeal.
Thank you, Aaron. Go
Quick
ahead, Mike.
question. So as of this point, we're just going to place it on the next agenda? Or how long are you recommending we table it for?
Table to the next agenda, if you would.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to table till the next agenda.
Do we have a
City council
second on
agenda,
that?
sorry.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, 7B, resolution adopting findings of facts for the Gendy property, comp plan amendment and rezoning. Jay?
Mr. Mayor and council members, let me see if we can find it. It's on page 97 of your packet. The On August 24th, we sent a 60-day rule letter to the applicants, extending out the 60 days to 120 days. And we have to have a writing to give to them memorializing the facts as to why their applications were turned down. And we have till November 21st, but why don't you guys take a look at page 99 of our agenda and see if you agree with what is stated there. Essentially, Bridget watched a video of the meeting and then tried to at least put your words down on paper.
Yeah. I read through this earlier,
Okay.
so.
If there's any language that you want to change, you should go ahead and change it, but we need to pass this resolution in some type of form tonight, and then it would be my recommendation that Donovan go ahead and send it to Richard Smith and Caleb Smith.
Can you clarify for me just points of procedure, because we took this vote last week, so now we're going to be voting just on the findings of fact, the resolution? I mean, where is this vote different than last week's?
The only thing that we're doing now is the parties that did not vote for the comp plan amendment and the zoning code change stated their reasons on the record as to why they were not voting for it. And then according to the 60-day rule, you're supposed to follow up at the next meeting with a writing. And this is it, stating your reasons. They're supposed to be the same as what you stated verbally on the record. And then the 60-day rule says within the 60 days or extended to 120 days, you have to send written notification to the applicants as to why you turned down their application. And then this gives us a writing to send to them.
Okay, on this, it says that I, Mayor Winnick, and council members Husnick, Eigner, and Bain stated their findings of fact and reasons for denial.
Yeah, that was the zoning, so the comprehensive plan went down to a 2 to 3 vote, 2 in favor, 3 against. And Councilmember Bain and Eigner and Husnick voted against it, and their reasons are there. And then we voted to say the comp plan amendment or the zoning change has got to be denied because the comp plan was not approved. And everybody voted unanimously for that.
No, we didn't. I did not vote for that.
And that's reflected in the resolution that way.
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry, my misstatement.
I don't like the explanation on here because it's a lot different than what you just verbally said. I supported not changing the zoning map because the plan was voted down. At that point, there was no reason to change the map. It wasn't because it's not consistent with the city's comp plan. The reason I voted against it was being that the Smiths' appeal was voted down, there was no purpose to change the map at that time. And I don't like the way this is written because I didn't vote for it because it's not consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. So I'd like to have that portion amended.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mike.
Jay, can you give me that 60, when did the 60 days start? When did the 60 days end? When did we send a letter extending beyond the 60 days to 120 days? Because I think what you just said a couple minutes ago actually puts us beyond that timeline.
According to the letter I have in front of me, the applications were received on July 24th. And then we had 60 days July, August, September 22nd for the first 60 days. And so prior to September 22nd, on August 24th, Donovan sent out a 60-day rule extension letter extending it to 120 days because the Planning Commission was taking some time with the applications. And then we extended out to 120 days, and that got us to November 21st, 2017. But so, you know, we don't have a 60-day rule issue.
Right. I just misunderstood what you said. I thought you had said that you had just sent the 60-day rule, so thank you, I appreciate that.
But we'll have a 60-day rule issue if we don't send a writing to them prior to November 21st of 2017. With, on page 99, you know, we can change the language saying Mayor Winnick, council members Husnick, Aigner, and Bain stated their findings, facts, and reasons for denial. We can say the proposed zoning map amendment cannot be approved since the proposed comp plan amendment was denied.
I'd be okay with that. So do we need a motion stating that before we take a vote on?
Yeah, you can just make a motion for this resolution with that change to it, and I'll give my hand scribbling to city staff.
Okay.
I'll make a motion for Resolution 10-23-17-02 as amended by staff for the paragraph B1A as amended by staff, as proposed to staff.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second on this?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion, Mike?
You know, this is a project that came before the city council 2 or 3 different times that we had discussions about, and there was never any inkling that this was a problem. And I'm very disappointed that it was rejected. Understand that we have every right to reject it based on, you know, where it was located and everything. But I would hope that in the future that if people have issues, we would bring them up sooner with the applicant so that they don't spend so much money on getting things in place and then just to be rejected by a bureaucratic piece. So with that, that's all I have.
So
All right.
quick response back to that comment. I think if you were to review my comments, I expressed prior to the vote on this in our workshop that we did have some significant hurdles for this project still to clear. And hence.
Fair comment. You did say that, but I don't think that you alluded to what those hurdles were at that point. But in fairness, we were towards the end of a workshop, but there was never any discussion that there were significant hurdles, what those significant hurdles were, excuse me.
Go ahead. Oh, I thought you had a question. I'm just really disappointed by, you know, this whole process on this one because, you know, to me, this is the best use of that piece of property, you know, whether it happens today or a couple of years from now, but it's just the logical choice. You know, the neighbors are, I think, extremely confused. I think city staff did not handle this even close to the way it should have been. I'm going to support the resolution so that we can, you know, get a closure on this and move forward. But I'm just very disappointed with, you know, between the Planning Commission, city staff, everybody, the just misinformation and confusion that went out to the neighbors. It should have been handled much more professionally, so, go ahead.
The only question I have is what right of appeal, if any, does the applicant have going forward? And if none, how soon before they can bring it back again?
I don't think they have any right. I think they would just have to present a new application.
So Mayor, members of council, Mrs. Smith did contact me today, and I believe Mr. Smith contacted Jay as well. And you know, they asked what their path was moving forward on this, and there may be maybe Donovan, there is a time frame for resubmittal potentially. I don't know what that is, but at least for certain things, that is the case. But you know, realistically, I said, you know, you got a denial here that, you know, it's something the city would have to change, I would anticipate, in order for the application to be considered. And, you know, I don't know that it was one thing, but I think a large portion of the discussion revolved around the fact that while they may not have perceived the need for certain infrastructure, streets and things like that, I think there's a projection that that demand would be generated based on, you know, future occupants of the development. We certainly see a lot of that happening already today. With the golf course being in place down there, and, you know, lack of paved road, and I think there's this other sort of broader discussion on growth management, and, you know, is this sort of leapfrogging that? But as we talked about the previous hearing, there's unique circumstances here too with utilities and access to sewer that you wouldn't likely have, you know, but for a sewer pipe being run down there. I guess the only advice that I could provide, you know, was monitor our comprehensive plan process. That certainly is something that we have going on. There likely is going to be some discussion on that issue, on that area. And then engagement with the neighbors. You know, if they wanted something sooner than that, you know, I think you have to kind of work with neighbors to better ferret out and discuss what their issues might be, and if there's opportunities for that to, you know, bring forward a different result or perspectives there. And so I don't know if there's a lot of other advice to be provided to the applicant unless some of you folks want to change your mind.
All right. Any further discussion?
I guess I would just hope that city staff send an apology to the Smiths based on providing misinformation to the neighbors, because that was a significant piece as to why the neighbors were there, and I would hope that that would actually happen.
Mayor, Council, I'm going to disagree with that, just in the fact that I think what was trying to happen here is an effort to work them through a process, to, you know, realize that there were a lot of challenges with this application. It wasn't as cut and dried as you ultimately saw in the end result of this. It wasn't as cut and dried as they might have been led to believe and or ultimately was the case. And so
were residents told that they may be assessed for some of these issues or for some of the infrastructure?
Certainly, as we went through the different permutations about how the development could happen, that was a scenario that was discussed. Now,
but that was sent out to
you
the
ultimately
neighbors.
weighed in on that at the workshop and, you know, indicated that that was not something that was being considered. But if it was going to take water extension and or road extension, certainly you're in a situation where what is one mechanism to enable that to happen? It could be city initiated, and we gave you the information on what it would take for that to happen. Or, you know, if you're creating benefit and value to property, one mechanism is assessment. And that's not traditionally what we've done here. But here's the struggle we deal with from a staff perspective is, you know, we get direction from the council that you want us to try to get people across the finish line. And in order to try to get people across the finish line, we can go through a number of scenarios for people and how do we get to yes, and what are some options. But in the process, you know, and sometimes, like what ultimately happened here, sometimes you just have to vote on an application and just say, this is what we want to do. Another dynamic in this, of course, was, do we do a comp plan amendment for an isolated area, which I think the Planning Commission ultimately had a hard time with, where, you know, you got into that spot zoning discussion, got into, is this really what we're looking at in the broader area, or do you do a broader area? And I think, of course, we're trying to take the feedback that we're given from, you know, let's say at least 3 different groups or 3 different perspectives on the application, maybe 4 when you factor in neighbors. And so we try to do that, but at times too, that can create confusion. And, you know, the alternative though is to basically say, well, put forward your best application and we'll vote on your best application. I don't think that's the standard of service that you want us to be aspiring to. But when we're trying to develop options and brainstorm and be creative, that, you know, sometimes you can get into these confusing situations. So I don't know that I'm not saying everything was handled perfectly here. I'm not saying that, but I'm also saying on its face, this application had challenges from the very start, and, you know, it was a difficult application.
Mayor, call the question. I'm sorry, I withdraw that.
Ed?
One other question. By this decision, have we set any precedent going forward for other projects that may be similar?
Mr. Mayor and council members, I don't believe in precedent because I never want to admit that there could be one. I think as council members, you can change your mind at just about any time. And usually each project and each piece of property is different, but you could sit there and say, have this project and say, we didn't think it was a good idea, but after reflection, 2 weeks later, you could say the same one next door. We changed our mind. We think we made a mistake before, so I don't like the word precedent.
Donovan, is there a time frame for resubmittal? I know certain applications you can't submit within a year or something like that.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
No.
And Mr. Mayor and council members, I did talk at length with Mr. Caleb Smith. I told him I couldn't advise him what his appeal options are, but I think we had a good conversation and, you know, so this application came through, got denied, and we have to pass this piece of paper to comply with the 60-day rule. But it's not stopping him from coming back with maybe a little different development scheme at some later date. And that happens quite often in cities with disputed developments.
Go ahead, Mike.
Can you help me understand why you're not allowed to counsel him on what his appeal options are?
Because I represent the city.
Well, doesn't the city provide applicants with the process and what they're able to do, what they're not able to do?
Your
Well,
Honor,
I did tell him that he would have to hire legal counsel, and then a lot of times, if it's an appeal of these land use decisions, whether you're going to try to go to district court or on a writ of certiorari to the Court of Appeals, but
Understood. As long as you gave him the option that he has legal ramifications, I think that's all we're required to do. Thank you.
and there's no, yeah, maybe just if it was confusing, there's no, I mean, you are the final decision maker here on this. I mean, it came up from Planning Commission, and you are with, you know, there's no appeal to the state board, or, yeah, it's a legal pathway.
Correct. As long as people are getting a general idea of what their options are, that's what we should be doing. So,
All right.
Mr. Mayor, I call the question.
All right, do we have a second on that?
Yeah, you did.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
No.
And any abstains? Motion carries. 7C, zoning text amendment, and we have an open forum speaker to this.
Yeah, great.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members, staff. My name is Peter Butte, B-U-T-T-E. I live at 244 2nd Avenue Northwest. So I'm in the northwest quadrant of the city, right at the intersection of 2nd Avenue and 3rd Street. I'm here just tonight to talk briefly and maybe shed some additional perspective on the proposed zoning ordinance changes that are being brought to your attention tonight. My family's lived in our house since 2009, and we're subject to the prohibition against expanding the footprint of our property because we are a legal non-conforming single-family home in the mixed-use 1 zoning district. So we're the single-family home, but we're zoned in this mixed-use area. Just to give a little bit more description of where our property is, and I bring up my property particularly because I think it really exemplifies what the problem is here and why these changes need and should happen. I'm on the corner of 2nd Avenue and 3rd Street. To my east and to my south are single-family residences.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Just by sheer coincidence, I actually have an aerial photo of your house.
Oh.
This is not planned. It just happens to be. If I could show that.
Not creepy.
Ironic, but
We're not keeping an eye on you.
not the NSA.
But I have talked to your wife before about this issue.
Oh, yeah, you probably have. Well, I'll just go on while he gets it there, but it has Cherrywood points to the south. The new lighthouse lofts are being built over to the east, but then everything to immediately to the west is the 156 Club or the Alcoholic Anonymous Meeting House. But everything to the north and to the west is zoned as residential. And that street, the Second Avenue and Third Street, they were pretty convenient ways of zoning and creating zoning boundaries, but they're pretty ineffective and limiting for my use and for my neighbor's use when we're left as non-conforming properties. So essentially, my neighbors have garages and accessory buildings because they were pre-existing, but we have not been allowed to build a garage or an accessory building because we're not allowed to expand on that footprint. So, like I said, my property is just really on that cusp of the transition between the residential and the commercial use, and I think that it's looked at as a burden in that commercial district without giving it any benefit of the role it plays as a transition to what is going to become residential. So you can force commercial boundaries right up to that Second Avenue and Third Street line, but then you don't have any transition to where it all of a sudden turns into this residential district. So I urge these changes because I think that it allows me to utilize my property fully while still allowing the city to work towards their comprehensive plan. I think the big issue here is that the proposed changes in the language, they'll allow the property owners to serve as that transition while still giving the city control. So it removes that blanket prohibition from removing or from expanding the footprint, but really allows it to take this kind of case-by-case basis and applying for a conditional use permit to expand and use the property in a way that meets both the citizens' needs and the city's needs. And I think in that sense, it kind of takes away from being ineffectively broad and helps narrow down how it can be useful to both sides. Just having said that, though, the one concern I do have when I looked at it was that it's going to require a conditional use permit. And I don't have any experience with conditional use permits, but from the application process I saw some things that looked to me to be kind of burdensome, especially from a perspective of someone trying to use a commercial space for a residential purpose. Maybe these stringent restrictions would be necessary for someone who's trying to open a business or do something in a residential area, but things like the $1,000 application fee, there were subjects relating to soil samples or the other uses around the area. I would just hope that if you decide to amend the zoning ordinance, that we also give some leniency and some understanding in particular cases where if the purpose is to allow these places to expand, then you need to give them the opportunity to do that. I think it just really comes down to the fact that this is, right now, the zoning ordinance is just a blanket prohibition, a very strict rule in a situation that needs some flexibility. I'd be happy to answer or give you my opinion on anything if you have anything for people that this directly affects. But otherwise, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm actually against this because it requires a CUP. I think he's absolutely right on. I think this is another bureaucratic thing that we're putting in place. I understand that right now some of these are non-conforming, but I don't think we need to use a CUP. I think there's other ways of being able to come about getting to the same spot without having to do soil samples, pay the $1,000, and all of the other things that would be required going before the planning commission and all those things. So, is there other ways that this can be done without having to go through the CUP process?
Or do we have a
Yeah.
residential track for a CUP that has a CUP light type requirements rather than the whole thing?
Your Honor, it might be helpful for Donovan just to give a brief overview of the ordinance. And then also, I don't know that there's anything in the conditional use permit application process that's going to be significantly different than what it would take to get a building permit. So I know we have in our applications that there's a lot of things, but in practice, generally we see variances and other things come through. The standard for application isn't going to be a lot different than what you see on the traditional variance applications. Probably not anything, again, different than what will be required for a building permit, minus the fee. And so, certainly you can adopt, something in the schedule for applications for this particular section, that, there's a fee waiver or something like that. I know Jay might have an opinion on that too, but there is a philosophy behind the use of a conditional use permit here, and so maybe Donovan can talk about the ordinance and then try to get into some of those questions and then maybe talk about the fee, waiver concept or, Jay.
Mr. Mayor and council members too, I think we should let Donovan go through. We do have two different ordinances and they're two different animals, two different situations. And we're talking about ordinance 670, but I guess we can come back to 669, but Donovan can give an overview, but you could always change the zoning districts and make a single family use as a permitted use. I mean, that's always an option, a different option. We saw this as a way to not have them be permitted uses and allow expansions of nonconformities with a CUP. So,
And a single-family use would allow for accessory structures because you would then be under similar text as a residential zone, or how does that work?
I mean, in a lot of city codes, say there's an industrial park, and then there's one guy left there sitting in a single-family home. He's either like a nonconformity, or you could have in the zoning code that you can have all these industrial uses and you can have a single-family home. So then he can go apply and get a Menards shed, or go from a 2-stall to a 3-stall, but.
Of course, the disadvantage of that is you're allowing residential uses potentially to proliferate in an area where you're not envisioning them in the long term, and I think that's where you're trying to strike the balance. Right now, it's very much orientated toward the amortization of these uses out over time. And in the process, of course, when these people built these homes, they weren't asking for the zoning to change. I mean, that's what was there. It was a home, but. We have the similar situation south of the compost site where that area has been guided industrial business park. Same logic, is applied where do you want people expanding those or do you want it ultimately to transition to business park? And so it's trying to strike the balance between ultimately getting to your comp plan and allowing for reasonable use of the property in the intervening period of time. So. You can do it that way, but like in Jay's example, let's say you allowed a single family in the business park zoning, there'd be nothing to prohibit someone to come in and subdivide that property as single family residential zoning. And that's not what you're looking for in the long term on that site. So it's a balance. But.
I'd let Donovan go ahead and give his presentation before we get any further. 3 minutes?
Yes, sir. I'll begin with obviously there's two ordinances up for council consideration. They both were recommended for approval by Planning Commission. We've been working on this since the late spring, since I've received, comments, requests, and some frustration from property owners in these situations. Particularly, as mentioned here with Mr. Butte, the property just behind the old City Hall site. And also, as Aaron mentioned, the business park district. We're currently, if you look at the permitted uses, these aren't included. And I saw this as an incremental step to allow for homeowners to expand their residential use if they so desired. And being that a garage or a house addition is much less of an investment than a whole home, or in a way that it wouldn't be such a barrier for investors to come in if they wanted to redevelop the property to one of the other permitted uses that's meant to be like in a downtown area, meant to be more of like activity center and multifamily as a residential use. The other part of it is again involving lots where there's a residential use where the home, this is, mostly occurs on North Shore Trail, North Shore Circle, 217th Street, 210th Street, and the roads around Lake Hiawatha, where you have a home on the lakeshore lot, and then you have adjacent to that, a lot in common ownership, and there's either a current garage there or a vacant lot, and the resident would like to put in a garage or expand the current garage, repair it, or put in more storage space. And then there is some of the conditions for this that the Planning Commission recommends, that the two lots be in common ownership within 100 feet of each other in the single-family and rural residential zoning districts, so just the ones that ring the lakes, the main lakes, and that still the structures have to meet the required side and rear yard setbacks for accessory structures, and they must meet the front yard setback of 30 feet in this case for principal structures, no larger than 800 feet, and that it's, again, done through this CUP process, which Aaron has mentioned is, something of a flexible process. If it was a garage, we would probably not, it wasn't in a lot area where there was some concern about soil conditions, we wouldn't require soil samples. But, like with a building permit, we would require a survey and many other things related to that. And many of these properties still may not even be able to put an accessory structure in just because of lot limitations, and maybe might even come in for a variance, even if we did make it a permitted use. So essentially that's, it's an effort to acknowledge there are non-conforming situations out there, they're not going away, and how can we allow for some zoning code flexibility to allow people to take underutilized lots or allow them to expand their residential use where it, in a way that's not going to be totally in conflict with long-range plans for that area.
Yeah, just from a historical perspective on this, one thing I would note is this is not Mr. Butte's first time coming to a meeting and talking about this. And the Planning Commission had previously, a handful of years ago now, discussed the idea of doing something like this and was reticent to do so, just because they really felt they want to be moving toward, ultimately, the identified, vision in the comp plan. But yeah, it seems to me that this is a positive step in the right direction in terms of allowing that to happen and give people some flexibility.
And there's one other piece that I want to mention, and this is, I brought it up on your screen, which is this would actually modify.
Up, down.
Oh.
You're still on.
Okay, sorry about that. This would modify the non-conforming uses section of the code, and this would allow non-conforming uses in residential zoning districts may be expanded with conditional use permit. This specifies the districts in which the mixed use of commercial industrial districts in which this could occur. And this would also apply to some of the other situations where we have, for instance, Stella's or the Aqua restaurant, where they're in a residential zoning district and non-conforming uses. So it's giving those properties a way that they can respond to different market conditions or different ways they could utilize their property. So with that, I'd like to take any questions from you.
Can you repeat what you just said about the very last sentence about Stella's? You gave a couple of examples.
Yeah, it's Stella's, Aqua, or even Tim's Marina.
Right.
They're all in the single-family residential zoning district. They're commercial operations, so they're grandfathered in. They're legally non-conforming as they are. But if they sought to expand, this would allow, for the CUP process to, a city approval process that could that allow them to expand, or just change. I mean, it's.
Mr. Mayor and council members, Ordinance 670 was kind of Jay's brainstorm. If you look at page 107, we had language in there where it said the city may impose a non-conforming use in a residential zone, a conditional use permit, and the city in the past had granted that Aqua restaurant, I'm sorry, I've never been there. I should go there sometime, but we had granted them expansions of their non-conforming restaurant with conditional uses, interpreting that language as allowing the word expand. And I said, okay, at some point we need to clean up that part of our zoning code. And then we said, well, what are we going to do about these houses where the problem with nonconformities is they usually don't go away, or unless some developer comes in and can make a buck off of doing something different. And I said, why don't we just, kind of clean up and say that we can expand nonconformities with a CUP, clean up the language, and then at the same time just add in the MU1, MU2, and the BP so that these single-family homeowners that are stuck there and just want to have a garage and a Menard shed until they don't, some developer comes and buys them out. This seemed like the easiest way to go ahead and make that happen without throwing single-family uses as a permitted use into those zoning districts.
Thanks, Jay. Donovan, I got three questions here. First is, looking at the photos you had, trying to, envision what people might want to do. But you were showing, several lots around the lake where, there's a road going through and the landowner has a lot on the other side and a house on one side. And, this is a perfect place to put up an accessory structure. Now my question is, are these accessory structures required, or will they be allowed to hook up to sewer and water and electric? Or are these just more of a primitive unheated structure? How do we regulate that? Or are they gonna, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. In many cases, if they were lots large enough, in this case, 9,900 square feet, they often have a house built on them, just basic, economics. But that is, the city cannot accept a building permit for a lot, a non-conforming lot, small. If it's, I'm sorry, it's, I'm talking about subdivisions, but basically, if it's can meet setbacks, then the city could issue, a building permit for that, and they could hook up to, city's sewer with the well. Many of these cases, the lots aren't big enough.
Well, but if
they
they're
are-
just
but they
putting
are-
an accessory structure, a garage on it,
Right, but
are we
the-
gonna allow them to hook up sewer and water and everything, or?
But they would have to become a dwelling to have the full set of services, where, the city, because there's a concern about things that become garages that turn into dwellings. And
Yes.
basically, the zoning code does not allow a accessory structure on a lot unless there's a principal structure. So this is, an expansion of that in these very limited cases involving the proximity of a home, 100 feet from the lot in which this accessory structure would be placed, and then, it meets the setbacks and impervious surface requirements, et cetera. But really tried to craft this so that it wouldn't create additional homes, but instead people with these lots would use them for just more storage space, because it seems that's, contemporary life, that's what we want. Because I don't see it as a real need to increase the density around the lakes. I mean, that's not the intention of this at all. It's simply to allow people who want to expand their garages or place a garage on a vacant lot, meeting these conditions. It's just because there are a lot of underutilized lots, or else these are ones that maybe they're single-car garages and people want to expand them to two-car garages, and currently that's just not allowed.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor and council members, I just also, Donovan and I have gone back and forth on this one, and so you have the lake lots, and if you own the lot on the other side of the street, if Sam owns it and there's a garage there, he can go ahead and use it. If I just own the vacant lot, I can't put a garage there, because you can't have an accessory structure without a principal structure. Now, sometimes the county will let you do a tax parcel combination of your lake lot and the one across the street. Then we can say, okay, it's one big lot. So I can put the accessory structure over there and my principal structure is across the street. Sometimes if the lake lot is here, but the garage lot is 3 lots down, the county's saying, we're not gonna let you do a tax parcel combination there. So then what do we do there? Then, but the thing that, you know, always scares you about these is, say Sam has his house on the lake, you know, 3 lots down, he's got his garage structure where he stores his boat. They're 2 separate tax parcels. Sam could sell me the garage structure. And then I could just sit there and so then it's kind of goofy then if that garage structure is not tied to one of the lake lots. And I could just go there and have bonfire parties and you know, play music in my garage. So we're trying to work with the property owners but there is some risk with this ordinance, but I think Donovan's trying to address the people that all along the lake that just want to have a garage on the piece of property they own across the street if they can't get a tax parcel combination.
When we manage the line between what's a garage and what starts to look more like a residence based on the conditions that are presented or the plans that are presented through the CUP process. So on a case-by-case basis, we're able to say, yes, that fits the CUP definition of that conditional use versus we may deny another plan because that starts to look like a residence. Do I have that we have to kind of go back to the
Well, it's
mayor's
the water
question?
and sewer hookups.
That's discretion that we manage then through the CUP process.
Yeah, that's not an uncommon conversation between the building code official, Chad, and I.
Right.
Involving additions where pretty much if someone wants to put a water closet, you know, in an accessory structure, that's okay because
Right.
you're working outside, you want to wash your hands or whatever, you don't want to come in. But when you get down to cooking facilities, means to, you know, a hot water heater, living space for, obviously for sleeping, there's a whole range of criteria where we just say there's a hard, fast line that no, you're trying to build a house, this building permit will not be approved. And we would go through a similar weeding out process, you know, when we receive an application of this type.
Next part of my question is, you know, more specifically related to what was presented here is it's obviously a transition area. One parcel alone isn't going to spur redevelopment. It's going to have to be a group of them. But until that happens, what process opens it up for if a homeowner there decides that they want to open up a business here instead? You know, they want to leave that residence there, but turn it into a chiropractic clinic, something like that. Is there a way to enable that and to, you know, kind of facilitate the transition of these neighborhoods from single-family residential into business area?
Oh, certainly. I mean, it would just simply be a site plan approval process, you know, along with the building permit. So as far as just when we receive an individual application, if you're talking about a larger community development policy,
Well, I'm
it's a
just
whole different
saying, you
conversation,
know,
but-
let's pick any one of these, you know, homeowners right there that, you know, they're gonna invest some money in, they wanna live there now, but obviously there's gonna become a point fairly soon where that's not gonna be a real desirable as a single-family residence with, you know, high rises on both sides of it. So how do we facilitate, you know, allowing them to expand, to grow right now, but, you know, be able to recoup that investment if that transition point, I guess, you know, rather than just saying, oh, you got to tear this down and build a new building.
I mean, it's really hard to predict, you know, what type of user would want to be there. But in these conversations, which I've had a few, you know, I've asked the property owners, is there a business that you are trying to build there? I mean, if they could show that they were going to locate a business, you know, in the upstairs of a house attachment that was part, you know, that had a garage maybe, but then upstairs they were going to do furniture reupholstery, then I believe that'd be a permissible expansion of that structure.
You know, along Broadway, I think there's still a few residents that are residential-looking structures that are businesses. And you know, as time goes by, that transitions into, you know, more modern businesses. But, you know, what I see here is, you know, hopefully our downtown district growing and, you know, not to displace residents, but to help facilitate that transition naturally anyway, so. The conditional use permit part of it and, you know, the non-conforming uses, I'm just asking where, you know, is that going to limit these property owners' ability to sell their houses, do anything if the next buyer wants to, say, invest in that, maybe rent it out as a business until, you know, they can acquire 2 or 3 or 4 lots and go from there?
Well, I mean, I think any improvement on the property, you know, could be of interest to a future buyer. And here, you know, we're looking at expansions, accessory structures, which allow for more storage or different types of storage. And you know, it seems like it's a much larger question around how do you kind of ease that transition? Maybe you know, it's like an EDA question.
But, and Mr. Mayor and council members, I don't see that if he gets a CUP so that he can have a Menards accessory structure, go from a 2-car to a 3-car garage, you know, detached structure, and then I come in and I want to buy his house and rent it out as an antique shop. The fact that he has a recorded CUP that lets him do that doesn't prohibit him at all in the future from selling to me and me making a commercial use under the zoning code. I don't see where that's going to hurt him in the future.
Okay, that's more where I was going with it is, if this is approved, it's not pushing us backwards as far as progress and redevelopment of those areas of the city.
Oh, certainly. I mean, the CUPs are valid as long as the conditions, you know, granted with them are still existing. And if it was a complete different use change, the CUP would go away.
Okay. Go ahead.
Donovan, some of those lots, especially the lots downtown, are basically the ones that people that want garages don't have garages. Their lot sizes, and if you're going to meet the setbacks and the non-pervious and all this, the lot size is not big enough. How do they do all this?
Well, I mean, you might get moved into a variant situation, or it might encourage them to do an attached garage to meet those setback requirements, because then it you know, that changes a little bit.
I mean, we run into this.
And if you notice, we didn't craft you know, specific conditions for, you know, adopting that CUP, because each property is so different. I mean, around the lake, it's much more, you know, uniformity. We can identify what the conditions are, situations are, what we want to avoid. Downtown, it was
But then
more of,
aren't we just back to our regular way of somebody asking for a variance? I mean, I don't see where we're going.
well, in this case, it was something of, I thought it was, you know, Jay's elegant and simple solution to basically alter the conditional use standards. And I think that because, and I think also this is something the Planning Commission is a little more comfortable with, having a CUP, because variances seem to be much more kind of fluid and CUPs tighter. I mean, granted that the CUP conditions are, you know, if we receive an application, we would look to see, you know, does this, you know, is this consistent with different codes and CUP standards? But I mean, it's basically you can't unless we establish something of a use that single family is allowed there, we couldn't use a variance. I guess that's the short answer.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and council members, where we got into the kind of the use variance kind of legal rabbit hole discussion was, say Sam wants to put a garage over on his lot across the lake. It's a separate piece of property and it's zoned single family, and he just wants to put up a garage. And I said, well, he can't do that. It's not if you gave him a variance to do that, he could it's a use variance. It's not a single family residence. It doesn't, you know, the building code, you gotta have a kitchen, you gotta have plumbing, you gotta have a toilet. And if he just wants to build a garage, then essentially we're letting him have a industrial storage in a single-family zone. So we're trying not to have variance applications in for use variances, and we're trying to deal with kind of, with 669, the unique lake community with the garages across the street, and then with 670, the guy that wants to use his house fully as a single-family home before the market forces buy him out.
Go ahead, Mike.
I still lead back to if, like the gentleman that presented up here, if he's trying to build a garage on a lot that we're going to say there's not enough pervious area, there's not enough room for the setbacks, I mean, we're right back to where we started, I think.
Yeah, I think you could give him a CUP to expand his non-conforming use, and you could give him a setback variance too if the garage can't fit.
That would have to be done on a case-by-case basis,
Right.
and that's what we have now.
Even if you change the zoning to allow for the accessory structure, though, they're still in a variance situation. So you could, let's say you could rezone that single family, and if it doesn't meet the single family zoning criteria, you're still, processing a variance. So it happens oftentimes. Almost every application we have come through is doing concurrent applications. It would be conditional use and variance, or site plan approval and variance, or whatever the case is.
What about the structures that are under a certain square footage that you don't really need a permit?
Correct. Under 200, but still under 200 for a building permit,
Yeah,
under
whatever
120
it
for
is.
zoning review. But that would still be an expansion of the single-family use, because obviously.
Okay, so how do you, they don't need a permit, so how do you stop it?
We try, the neighbor calls, complains,
Yeah.
sometimes it's right in the property line, and so it's.
Well, that was the question I had with in line with Ed's questions about setbacks and that kind of thing too. And detached accessory structures, that usually implies a structure that's sitting on a slab, it's not sitting on a foundation at all. And so this other business of having soil, whatever
testing.
whatever you want to call it, checking the soil and whatever, it seems like a ridiculous requirement for something like that. So.
No, we generally do, craft the submittal requirements to the application, and even getting back to Ed, and actually in Mr. Butte's zoning district, the impervious surface requirements are exempted because it is a downtown area, and we don't want, much of the, developable area just devoted to, 70% of it, say, to open space, pervious areas.
Well, the other thing, if you ask somebody to attach a garage, for instance, to get it closer, to get it more setback, then that requires footings and that sort of thing to attach it to the main structure.
Correct.
So the big question would be setbacks. I agree with Ed on that. I mean, that was going to be my question on that.
And
I see nothing wrong with building a garage. Believe me, I love garages. I think everybody should have one. This business of parking on the street and all this other stuff in the middle of winter is ridiculous. But I think we have to, just be able to do it in a way that helps everybody, really.
And there is, it's really hard to craft code that really applies for each individual structure. But, and Jay's correct that the zoning code does not allow a use variance. So we couldn't just say, all right, we have to attack it at the kind of deeper level around allowing the use, which in this case, it's the, non-conforming residential use we're
To
defining.
get down to the meat of the situation, I'd like to ask the applicant, what size building were you thinking about, sir? I mean, how many square feet are you thinking about?
Well, we don't have any garage or accessory building now, so my ideal would be to put something like a Menard shed in the back first, and then my dream ideal would be to do an attached garage.
Attached?
Yep, and my wife is a realtor, and so at some point would like to maybe mix.
Okay, but how many square feet of an attached garage are you talking about? 400, 425,
So
something?
it's a two-stall garage plus maybe some office space above.
Yeah, well, the square footage is the big thing there. So I mean, that reverts right back to the setback issue.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and council members, I also serve as Matamita's city attorney, but the one thing that I see there, they have all these tiny little lake lots along White Bear Lake, and all those homes are being improved, but what I've seen with that council is they said, everyone gets a 2-car garage these days, and we're gonna process variances, and if you want 3 cars, maybe not, but if you just want 2 cars, we're gonna help you get it on the lot. I mean,
I believe in garages.
I think Mike had a question. Did you have a question, Mike?
I have like 3.
Go Ed,
So-
you'll be next.
Donovan, you said earlier that some of these are, it's not going to take care of all the non-conforming. Have we covered all of those situations? Meaning, I think I agree with what was said earlier. Over by the lake, much more straightforward, understand, but I think the downtown is really the area that is a little bit different here. So are we covering this with this discussion? Is there something we're missing? Because this, I agree with what Sam said. We're going to end up in the same spot over and over and over. Then we're going to charge them for a variance at the same time?
Maybe we could create use standards for these types of lots, where we make, smaller setbacks, maybe there's a minimum garage size of 528 square feet in the zoning code, and maybe that's altered as well, so that give people a chance where if they, meet these certain conditions, then they don't need to apply for the variance.
And if they apply for a CUP, do they also have to pay for a variance at the same time?
That would be a separate application. The way it's structured now, yes.
So it costs more, okay.
That would be, CUP is a $1,000 application fee, variance is
There's
500. I mean, we'd use the same submittals. I mean, we wouldn't have to submit things twice, but.
You just pay for you to do, okay. And then the use variance, how does a use variance would it work?
Well, I'm saying they're not allowed by the zoning code currently.
But if we change the zoning code to allow it, how
But they're
would
not
it?
allowed by state law, right? I mean,
no, I mean, like the
Okay.
use variance would, say for example, you had 5-acre single-family lots, and he's got a nice house, and then you let me build him a pole barn in between, where I just sit there and I do welding in my pole barn. Then you gave me a use variance because I'm in a single-family residential district, and
I see what you mean, thank you.
poor Sam's next to the pole barn.
Yep, got it.
All right. Go ahead, Ed.
The question I had, and I live on Clear Lake, and I'm well familiar with the lots across the street, small lots. But since I've been out there, and I've been out there 18 years, and there have been a few cabins that, for lack of a better term, won't ever be developed because their lots are too small. Yet, we turn around and across the way, we let them put garages. Well, the tax return on a garage is next to nothing. I'd rather see a new home going up on a smaller lot. And kind of what Jay had alluded to, that is it White Bear that you said is doing that? Or Matamidi?
Well, in Matamita,
But, I mean, these
They
things, these
just said-
cabins will stay there forever.
they seem to be processing a lot of variances
Whereas-
if somebody is reasonably trying to get a 2-car garage, and people, instead of 24 feet, they're going down to 22, but they're trying to let them have a 2-car garage these days.
I mean, I can cite an example where one of my neighbors was a cabin. The property across the street was a single-family home with an adjacent lot with nothing on it. This fellow wanted to own the cabin, wanted to tear the cabin down, put a new house up, buy the existing property and the empty property across the street, put a garage there for his toys for the lake on the one that doesn't have a garage now, and then sell off the house, and the city wouldn't let him subdivide that lot across the way to sell the house off separately. So it turned out someone else bought the house and put a garage. It turned out the very same way he wanted to do it. The only difference is the owner now has owned the property with no garage in the existing dwelling. And the city, all they got for a tax benefit is a garage. There could have been another home there. So I think we need to take a hard look at these smaller parcels around the lakes. or we're going to have these cabins forever.
Yeah, I mean, there was one situation where the Planning Commission didn't go forward with a text change, and that involved, where you have the vacant, you have, again, the lakeshore, non-lakeshore lots, common ownership, and just the garage on the non-lakeshore lot without the house on the lakeshore lot. So they said, we don't want that garage expanded. So, I mean, I can look at again what, is there a square footage ratio that you couldn't build a garage so many more, so much larger than the existing home that's attached to? I mean, that's a possibility. But it's, what I look at is just the kind of the force of economics in the marketplace, the real estate market, compelling people to find a better use for those smaller cabins, rebuilding those in a smaller footprint, as some people like to do these days, downsizing. And hopefully that's the solution, not through zoning text, but I can look at ways to, try to, so we don't, try to avoid that situation, because I hadn't thought about that one.
I guess the 800 square feet, I think, to me, that's just an arbitrary number that's picked out, or where is that?
That was basically 1.5 times the 528 square foot, minimum garage size, because we, the code otherwise could give up to 1,500 square feet, which we thought was, Planning Commission thought was really, too much. It would really kind of aggravate that situation that Commissioner Eigner referred to. We really have a much larger garage.
But they have limitations of, on these smaller lots that we're talking about by around the lakes, of pervious, impervious. There's a limitation to how much they can actually.
Correct. So all those are, it's just changing, it's really just changing the use, but then applying those criteria where you need to meet the side yard setback, side and rear yard setbacks, any kind of wetland setbacks, the impervious, a front setback of 30 feet. So those are still, those still apply.
Okay, and in like the downtown, the mixed-use district, for residential applications, do they have to deal with the watershed district on any of these?
They probably would not, given they'd be below the, probably below the threshold of soil disturbance.
Okay.
For, maybe for soil sediment erosion control, but not stormwater. But, that's something we do with, as far as permitting for the watershed district. We do, encourage applicants to go talk to them, but, we don't make that determination. But generally, I'd imagine a lot of these would be just too small.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
So what's next? Do we look at this thing down the road, or what are we trying to accomplish here? I just soon, I'd like to figure out a way to get this gentleman a garage, okay? Because I love them, love those garages. But we certainly have to take into consideration of the zoning and the setbacks and that kind of thing. But I think there must be a way that we can do that without stepping on too many toes here. So do we need to look at this further? I mean, by tabling this, or that's what am I asking?
Yeah, sorry.
Mr. Mayor and council members, I think you can pass these two ordinances and see how they work, and if we get goofy situations, we can change it again. I mean, that's my opinion. I don't know what you were going to say, but.
Yeah, Your Honor, I think the ordinance really does address the issue, and if you want to weigh in on the fee waiver reduction, you can certainly do that. And I think that can be done via ordinance, or when we amend the fee schedule in November, certainly an opportunity to do it there too.
Go ahead, Mike.
I'd actually disagree. I think having some further guidance for staff at the November meeting or workshop would be a good idea, just to make sure that we get something in front of us that is going to actually serve the needs of the citizens, rather than waiting for something to happen and then, coming back. I remember having I believe I talked to you 5 or 6 years ago and we're still having the same thing. Government works extremely slow. So I would rather take another month to get this right and have this taken care of, rather than sitting back and waiting for 5 more years for the next person to get this done. So I would actually be in favor of tabling.
It sounds like we have a number of scenarios. The scenarios that we're talking about are different. So there's a number of scenarios. I can envision where this is going to be a multiple step process. What's in front of us today for both ordinance 669 and 670 seems to be a good start. Clearly, there's some more items on the agenda, but I think Planning Commission started working on this one late spring. I would hate to table, I mean, if we are in agreement that this is a good start, let's take, and unless there's challenges with that there's something off track here, I would hate to table and go off track with multiple other conversations when, if we're in agreement that, again, this is the baseline, let's move the ball a little bit down the court. Clearly, there are other scenarios that have been mentioned tonight that perhaps also need to be addressed, but I would hate to lose what ground has already been agreed to by the Planning Commission. Did this pass in a unanimous vote with Planning Commission?
Correct.
That would be my preference.
I would like to pursue what Councilman Bain said before about, is there any possibility that you can take a district and instead of each one of these individual people that want to build a garage coming up here, that you would incorporate, especially the old downtown district there, you would incorporate the whole district so that the Planning Commission wouldn't be inundated with variance requests. We wouldn't be inundated with people coming up with the same situation over and over and over again. So I don't know that that's possible, though.
I mean, we could change, basically make it a accessory structure, you know, or some sort of accessory structure to existing residential use, which takes care of the garage issue. It may not take care of the addition issue, house addition. And, you know, that would probably be the simplest. I mean, I think I'd like to, you know, pass this by our city attorney, because, you know, we still want to address the other, you know, conditional use in, you know, residential district issues. But, you know, I think there might be a way to, you know, I mean, that's, in some ways, that's how I originally thought of it, as, as a, you know, zoning text amendment, and maybe there's just, you know, some wiggle room there.
I appreciate also the comments around, let's package some things together so that we can make those garages possible. But I also have a sense there's probably some individuals around the lake that would just like a Menards structure on their adjacent lot. And if we can make that happen tonight, that's progress.
Mr. Mayor and council member, I mean, we can definitely take a look at other things or look at the different, but for example, ordinance 670 would allow this gentleman to do a room addition if he wanted to add another room and had another child, or he could add the Menards shed, or he could add the garage if he had enough impervious and land. So otherwise we can go look at it and just allow sheds and accessory structures of so many square feet or whatever. So it's whatever you guys would like to do.
I guess I'd like to have a little more discussion on the required conditional use and you know, where we need to go with that. I think, you know, landowners' rights, you know, trump the city trying to control properties. I do have some concerns about, you know, the quality of some of the accessory structures around the lake as years go by, and, you know, potential for lack of maintenance, but, you know, we do have remedies for that as well. But the whole conditional use permit area of it, I don't know if there's a way we can do this without triggering a conditional use permit. I'd rather do that than, you know, have to adjust a fee schedule for a conditional use permit. I think that at the end of the day, it probably doesn't make any difference, but I think it just, it flows better that way.
And I think, Councilmember Bain, that's why I was thinking about tabling it, is so that we could have those types of discussion. I thought your idea at the very beginning about, what other ways are there to make this happen, but not necessarily go down the conditional use permit was right on. And I also don't like the fact that they also have to pay for a variance. So really, you could pay $1,500 to go to Home Depot, not Menards this time, and get a structure to put on your yard that's cost you $1,000. So I think we need to take more time to have a little bit more discussion. I'm not looking to table this very long. Literally after the November workshop, it goes on the agenda. That's would be my preference.
I think that's reasonable.
Mr. Mayor, I move to table this to the workshop in November and then have it on the next council meeting after the November workshop.
Any specific direction for staff?
Staff heard the discussion and to draft something that relatively comes in line with what some of the discussion that you've heard here.
Thank you, Mike.
If I could clarify, the resistance to the having the CUP zoning pathway is more for the MU2, BP, and not the other ordinance, correct? Okay, sure.
At least from my perspective, yes.
All right, we have a motion to table. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Or motion tabled, I guess. So. We'll get something worked out for you.
Try to save you money at the same time.
All right, 7D, Highway 97. Aaron?
Members, council, I'll try to be brief here. As you know, we've been working on special legislation for our Highway 97 Driving Towards Safety initiative. Dan, if you could just cut me into the screen here. What we're looking for tonight is some direction from the council on our approach on the legislation. Representative Detmer and Senator Housley indicated willingness to get some legislation put together. We've got some draft legislation that at least will provide the framework as they then send it down to the reviser of statutes and get an actual bill put together. Realistically, you have two options. One would be to look at basically requesting the full amount. And we did this all in 2020 dollars and tried to reflect engineering and soft costs, which actually are not in the current handouts that you have, and we'll update that in the future. Based on that, if we requested the full amount of funding, you'd be requesting $16.5 million. Again, just for your reference, the summary of the project basically involves Goodview intersection improvements and pedestrian overpass, some trail connections from Goodview to Harrow, intersection improvements at Harrow, as well as turn lanes at North Shore Trail. And ultimately, that's the estimates for those projects. Option number two would involve basically requesting 80% funding and the city contributing 20%. Of course, it's always better to be fully funded. However, my observation over time, in this process is that communities that are willing to cost participate have a higher potential for success. And so you really have to kind of balance those two items into the equation. So in the scenario where we would be looking at option two, that would be requesting $13.2 million and of course requiring $3.2 million in order to fund a local share of the project. In order to do that, we would need to work on adjusting our state aid allocation. I think this is a possibility. As you can see, this is our 5-year list of projects, or actually longer than 5 years. We do have some additional funding coming in that is not reflected in these estimates right now. Maybe Ryan can speak to that momentarily, but from 18 out for, I think, at least 3 years, maybe longer, 4 years. Okay, thanks, Ryan. We are actually projecting a higher amount of state aid. And Ryan, what was that approximately per year?
Well, at the end of 2022, potential increases are close to $600,000 with the current legislation that was passed in a special session.
Is that 600,000 a year or 600,000 total?
So you have some amount there. As we've talked, if you remember, we've kind of got dual track strategy on 97. One is this request, another is trying to pursue funding through existing programs. We still have not heard from MnDOT at this point on whether they were able to reprioritize some of their trunk highway funding for just a roundabout only project at Goodview. In that case, we were looking at a local share of about $1 million if that was going to move forward. Some of that 600,000 would have been prioritized to that project. Otherwise, you're looking at reprioritizing some of these, some of which are already included a cooperative agreement project at Harrow Avenue. I think we tried to project some of those in, and so we were just trying to anticipate. So I don't know that it would take a lot of maneuvering to get there. We also do have the potential to borrow ahead on our state aid. So if there are projects that do come together that are able to be that need funding, we do have the ability to advance a couple of years of our state aid allocation. So that's also an option to be considered. But again, we do have some of this already laid out in the 5-year plan. Some of that additional funding certainly is a possibility. So we're really looking for council direction on that particular item tonight. Option 1, option 2, some variation or middle of the road point in between those. And then as we move forward and get the legislation drafted, next steps for us include putting together a short video, kind of building on the website and story map that Dan has already got a start on, getting resolutions and letters of support. We have had a conversation with the school district and are on their November agendas to ask for that support, and just kind of continuing on with how we're going to work with both our legislative delegation and others and residents on kind of an engagement strategy to ultimately move us forward on the project. So interested to hear council feedback on preferences for option 1 or option 2. There is, again, draft legislation in your packet as well that outlines how each of those could move ahead. So happy to answer any questions that you have.
I guess I'm not comfortable with the roundabout option on Goodview and 97 and the whole pedestrian overpass. I don't think we have data if this is going to increase safety. I think we're spending a lot of money without knowing what the results are. Ultimately, there's 15,000 cars a day going through there currently. And, are we just creating more of an inconvenience for the vehicles? The kids' safety is number one, without a doubt, but we don't have any data if this is going to increase safety. We don't know how many students a day are doing this or using this intersection. I think there's options including, potential, rerouting of, school roads, using some of the school property. I just think, we're committing to something now without having any real solid data that, yes, this is by far the best choice.
So Mayor's Council on that front, again, we did complete the intersection control evaluation. The roundabout and the pedestrian overpass was the preferred alternative. There was traffic modeling and analysis done in conjunction with that, as well as pedestrian counts. You can certainly take out elements of this project if you aren't comfortable with them at this point. And so, clearly a number of these things need to be done. And so if you're not comfortable with a particular project feature, you can take that out. We can revise the budgets. We can revise the legislative ask. But at this point in time, unless you have some specific data you feel that we should collect, we went through a fairly comprehensive intersection control evaluation study. We paid a decent amount of money for that. The result, basically was a roundabout and pedestrian overpass option as the preferred alternative here.
That's
There's-
what the council chose, I think, right? That wasn't recommended. They recommended several different options and so basically said, well, roundabout looks about the best.
There were a number of different options, although this option, was viewed as viable from the technical advisory committee's perspective. So we had a technical advisory committee. Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit about that process?
So we had a number of meetings on the technical advisory committee, consisted of the school board, MnDOT's, Bolton Main traffic engineers, and city staff. As we met and progressed through the project developments, first we started out by basically analyzing 6 different types of intersections, anything from a 4-way stop all the way to a dual roundabout. So we went through all the modeling just to see how traffic would be affected with each and every one of them. There were pedestrian counts taken. I know that was a big question at one of the later city council meetings here, and Aaron sent out a bunch of information that you guys requested that had traffic counts and some studies completed, whether the pedestrian bridge was completed or not, whether it was safe for pedestrians to cross within a roundabout versus a highway situation. So
Ryan, traffic counts were done, were pedestrian counts done as well?
yes. Aaron sent all that information shortly after one of our council meetings on, and it showed all the trips of the children. Aaron, 176 ring a bell for some reason?
Yeah, in that range. Yeah, I can try to pull it up.
How prescribed do we have to be at this point in the solutioning? I think we're talking about a funding bundle to move us from 61 to North Shore Trail. And there's going to be, throughout that project, a number of decisions that have to be made. I mean, clearly, the Goodview intersection is a big one, but the over-under on whether it's an intersection or a roundabout for cost, the cost difference as compared to the entire package is not overly material. So again, like how specific do we have to be on the use of those funds versus if the overall ask is we would like to partner on a funding solution to then be able to partner with MnDOT on specifics on what each one of those look like, whether that's a Harrow intersection discussion or a Goodview discussion.
So Mayor, members of council, what you want to have is, it's a fine line between, being able to accurately represent your project and, know what people are investing in and maintaining some flexibility as you move forward into final design and so on. So what we're looking for funding for here is these 4 areas. 1, a realignment of the intersections with Goodview Avenue and Harrow Avenue. Of course, when we go and whether it be testify, we'll say we have an intersection control evaluation that says this is the preferred alternative here. It doesn't necessarily preclude if in the future some technical evaluation came up that didn't make that feasible. But, right now it's realignment of intersections at Goodview and Harrow. Those are the 2 big intersection control areas. Harrow is even less defined because we have not done the ICE report for that. Turn lane construction at North Shore Trail, and then a pedestrian overpass and related pedestrian improvements adjacent to Century Junior High and Forest Lake High School. You could adjust this language on item 3 to say a grade separated pedestrian facility. It does need to be called out. It's about $1.5 million to $2 million feature. Ryan just flashed me the 2. Realistically, it's a significant portion of what we're asking for here. Also, as you know, that particular portion of the project, MnDOT at this point has represented that they're not interested in owning the facility in the way they own the current grade separated pedestrian or the overpass at 61 and 97. So, they have to be cognizant of that. If it is a project feature you don't want to own and you don't want to construct, it makes our ask kind of easier, actually, in some regards. Pedestrian safety will be enhanced with the realignment of that intersection. Vehicle performance will increase, pedestrian performance will increase. It's just, obviously there's different feelings about the degree on pedestrian safety without the grade separated solution.
So just to clarify, that means that we would not be actually saying that we're requesting a roundabout or anything in particular. It's just these 4 points that we'll get with the studies that go forward.
That's correct, and, you know, if there's a question on the preferred alternative, I mean, as we represent the project, we can say, you know, roundabout is currently the preferred alternative, however, we're still finalizing, you know, the approach, and we, you know, certainly have, you know, other options that have been explored in the process. So, you know, I think, like, if you recall from the, you know, there's sort of this probably not feasible option here, but, you know, realignment that way. This is what we came up with, and there's another one that was a little closer. I'm not putting my hands on it right now, but another one that was a little more, I think it was this option that probably had a little higher potential for a signalized intersection.
Go ahead, Ed.
Okay, again, to be clarified, if I understand you correct, MnDOT would not be participating in the overpass, or that would not be something they would?
That's been the indication they've given us so far.
So to request funds, we could leave the overpass out of it at this time, seeing as they're not participating in that anyway. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so, I mean, you can certainly include it in their request. I mean, I know that's been a significant conversation point in the community. You could certainly include it in their request. If you really, it's not maybe as much a function of getting it constructed initially. It's, do you want to own it after constructed? And so, right now we don't do that in any of our other overpass. We are not in ownership situations on those. So this is a departure from that.
No, I'm not in favor of ownership, and I'm not in favor at this time of the overpass itself, because I think there's other solutions rather than, and what I would like to see is a head count on the current overpass as to how many students are using that. Do we have any kind of data on that, Ryan?
Last time we actually spoke to MnDOT, they were in the process of going to be collecting that, so I could follow up on that, see if that's been completed.
I would agree. I'm not in favor of owning an overpass either.
Yeah, I agree there too. And could you forward me or to the whole council the pedestrian counts currently that are using the 97 Goodview area?
For the current condition?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah.
So I understand the concern over owning the overpass, but if the conversation is, if it's about bundling a group of assets together that have a kind of an unprecedented amount of state support, the economics to us as a city to own that overpass, you could make a good, strong case of if the overpass is built as part of a bonding request, maybe it does make sense for us to own that on an ongoing maintenance basis because you have an asset that we otherwise wouldn't have had because it's been bundled as part of these other assets that also come with the package. I guess I think we have a somewhat unique opportunity to take a number of trouble spots and bundle them together and make a strong case, and pedestrian safety is part of that. So I guess I'm hesitant to take something out of the ask. Now, obviously that it's an evolution and some things will obviously have to come off of the list, but I think, go with what's our best case. And I think there is a strong case there for clearly we've had some pedestrian safety challenges.
I don't disagree with a lot of what you said. My biggest issue is really around the pedestrian overpass that when we were talking about it, it snakes all over the place in order to comply with ADA. I understand why they're doing it, but it really, the path that people would be required to take, they're not going to take. And so it's really a $2 million bridge that at some point we're going to have to, fix up, and, 35 years down the line, maybe 50 years down the line, the city of Forest Lake is going to need to replace that bridge. And so that's my concern. It's just a long bridge that's not going to get used.
So I understand the concern. I think that again, just like, these are very preliminary designs, and we're going to have all sorts of those kinds of discussions to have to make down the future. I think there's enough of an attractiveness to the overall project to proceed with the ask, knowing that it's going to take some time, has a fair amount of uncertainty behind it, and we have time to make those design discussions, and some of those things could come off.
Yeah, because
Just because it's funded doesn't mean it gets done, right? I also don't want to build a bridge to
I was just
nowhere
gonna
that no
add,
one's
what's the
going to use, to be
alternative?
clear. Right.
Yeah, what's the alternative to the bridge? Because you got to get pedestrians across that damn highway, and it's nothing to be crossing. It's a terrible thing, the way the cars, and I don't care if it's a roundabout or a signal thing, those cars zip through there too fast as it is. And so we'd have to look at whatever that alternative would be for a bridge.
Well, go ahead.
I guess my question would be for Ryan. Ryan, you're the expert at basically requesting grants and monies from the state. And I guess I defer to your expertise as to how do you package this thing, with a bridge, without a bridge, or doesn't it make any difference?
Well, part of our initiative we're moving forward is transportation and pedestrian improvements for safety.
So my question to you is, how do you make this thing saleable, or doesn't it make any difference? Is it just a gross amount for safety improvement along 97 that we're asking for, or does it have to be specific to include bridges, roundabouts, 2 lanes, 4 lanes?
You're asking a pretty loaded question there, but the unfortunate thing is we've had a fatality there directly related to a pedestrian. That certainly will be seen, read, and scored very highly in an application. How do you address that? Even just constructing a roundabout or a signalized intersection is certainly going to increase what's out there today, because your sight distances are all going to be improved with the alignment of the road and all that. That will have to be in compliance and go through all these reviews within MnDOT, traffic and ADA and all that other stuff. Now, there's also then going to be that group that you often see in neighborhoods or just areas that aren't even still going to allow their children to cross that roadway with those types of improvements until you do something that's completely segregated from traffic. So they don't have to take that chance. Obviously, I think it'll increase the competitive of the project because you got multi-uses here now. You got traffic improvement, safety, and pedestrian stuff. And thus why you see some, if you look at the detail kind of costs that are, they're still pretty vague, just to be vague, but there are right-of-way costs in here of certain properties, and if you read each one of those line items, you can see kind of what's really happening here. You're losing some accesses, you're building some connectivity with the pedestrian improvements, and providing alternative routes separated from traffic for pedestrians in multiple ways. Now, yeah, the bridge is certainly going to be long because of the dynamics with this intersection, and that can't be avoided. We talked about alignments of that bridge. What would you be guys okay? We've talked about bringing it behind the well house. Nobody wanted it back there because of safety. It's too far away from the road. Now, if we're willing to do some of that stuff, yeah, your bridge gets much cheaper because we can use the terrain in the ground to come down and out of that.
No, but I guess my question at this point right now, and I guess it alludes back to what Councilman Baines is saying, do we have to have that amount of detail to package something to request
I
funds?
think that your detail needs to be, are you going with a bridge that's separated from at-grade crossings or not? Because that's clear cut in the funding. MnDOT went through that kind of with us where they originally had 2 bridges in their original application, and because of cost-wise, they pulled out one and had to go through the whole process again to get that approved for the federal funding because it was an intent to change the project. Now, if you applied for a bridge within the project and then once awarded the money and you didn't build the bridge, you're probably going to not get awarded the amount of money you thought you had coming.
But going back to, if I understood Aaron correctly, they don't want ownership, so they, in my mind, they wouldn't
MnDOT would
be
not take
providing any
ownership
money
of this
towards it.
bridge, so this would be the first structure, real actual structure the city of Forest Lake would own.
So Mayor's Council, I don't think you can have any less definition. I think our intention here is this is sort of the broader, piece of legislation. You do have to, outline, at least at the level we have here, your project elements, and as you go through the process, you're going to be asked to, provide a higher level of detail. And so I think it is a policy decision on whether you do or don't want to include the pedestrian facility. I will say a lot of the focus, as Ryan indicated, and the impetus for this really has been to create pedestrian safety improvements. I mean, there's traffic issues, no doubt, traffic safety issues, no doubt. I mean, we've seen a lot of, crashes and things too, on the vehicle level. But, certainly I think part of what's going to resonate with people on this application is that we are trying to address pedestrian safety issues based on an incident that has happened, and the proximity of the pedestrian generators you have in this area. I also know when we met with the school district,
It was talked about, but then we also knew we had a 72-unit apartment complex coming online too. And then there is a lot of busing interaction in between Forest Lake School District, St. Peter, and Letha that goes both ways. So there were a lot of other things that were going on in between there that I guess, without asking some of the questions in the beginning, might not have been known.
And do you think the school district's going to be willing to cooperate on ownership of this 50/50? Or is the city going to be on the hook for 100%?
I would say that the school is not in the infrastructure business generally. I can't point to a situation I'm aware of where a school is a partial owner of a pedestrian bridge. But we have not asked that question. I wouldn't anticipate that to be the case though.
Go ahead, Mike.
I know this is a really, really big long shot. We had a $100 million bond that passed in Forest Lake, and I know we were able to use a couple $1 million of that to purchase solar panels. I don't suppose there's a couple million to purchase an overpass.
So Mayor and Council, again, depending on how you look to finance this and what have you, it's probably not as big of a question on the upfront cost, as it is of what's the ownership cost. And again, we have maintenance responsibility from a snow removal perspective on the current bridges. It's just what happens when you have to make a repair. These things typically are eligible for state aid, so it's not necessarily probably a property tax thing. It's just a state aid prioritization for a repair and that kind of thing on your bridge structures typically. But it's what's that cost going to be in the future, and I'm not sure a school can commit to what that would be here and today. And if you take the $2 million out of the project, let's say you elect to not include the pedestrian overpass in the project, and you still want to contribute on a 20% basis, it just incrementally drops your number there. I mean,
Personally, I think if you're going to go after the money, you need to go after the whole package. That's just my opinion. Seems to me you can always back off, because this will take years to.
Yeah, so from a strategy perspective, I think Councilmember Husnick brings up a good point. Of course, you go in asking whether you're asking for the 80% funding or 100% funding, whatever you decide there. It wouldn't be unusual to not make it through your first ask. We're coming into the legislative session. There's been other process leading up to this already. There is a scenario, a lot of times what can happen is you can not get funded for the full cost, but you can get funded for the design cost. So they might say, well, we'll give you $1.5 million for design or whatever the projected number is there to get you started. And then the next bonding bill, you're better positioned for funding because they've made an initial investment in you. But that's all part of the evolution that you go through and these requests. And from a positive perspective, it's transportation. That's well received. It's focused on safety. That's well received. Another well received would be is if you invest some local money in it that they feel like they're leveraging. We go through the same thing, right? When someone comes and asks us for 100% of something, we're less inclined to say yes versus the Baseball Association comes and asks for half of the field, replacement costs. We might give the other half. That we've done those kinds of things in the past. So they're no different than us in that regard.
Well, one way or the other, it's us that are paying for it. I mean, the state isn't just printing this money, and I don't like to see it wasted. And I just would like to see some type of statistic, something that says this is going to improve safety. I mean, that's where I've been the whole time is, are we actually improving safety? And I don't see that part of it. I mean, the rest of it I'm fine with. I'd rather have a better solution for this intersection. I think there's better ones out there than what we're looking at with this twisted roundabout. And with the amount of cars going through there, is safety an issue right now? Yes, we did have one death. That was terrible. I mean, we had 3 people killed in front of Walmart in a car accident. We're not doing anything to change that intersection. We have other, bad car collisions at places. But we're not building bridges over every one of those. And that's, bottom line is, are we going to improve pedestrian safety? I don't want to see anybody else get hurt, but I just don't see this as answering that question.
I guess I'll just put something forward here. I'm perfectly fine asking for the 16.5 million with the state paying for the whole thing, knowing that at some point we can make a decision on the bridge. Now, I've already said I don't want to own the bridge, and I think there's other options. I don't know what would happen with the current beacon system that's further down at that point in time. I'm assuming that would stay there. I would hope it would stay there. There is on-grade crossing in these roundabouts as well, if this roundabout option. But either way, I think we should just put that forward and not do the local share. We had a death, and I think they'll fund it based on that.
Go ahead.
Question I have is if you go in asking for 100% of the project, including the bridge, do they counter? Do they come back and kind of like the airport thing and say, well, no, we're not going to give you 100%, we'll give you 80%?
They very well can do that. It happens almost all the time.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we ask for everything?
Go for broke.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think we agree 100%. I think we need to have in our mind a back pocket number on, are we interested in a local share participation? And, in my mind, given what we just heard, option 2 is option 2 wouldn't be my starting spot, but I think option 2 is still a better overall solution than us individually as a city trying to determine what are we going to do with each one of these intersection points. Again, it's not where I would start, but given the conversation that we just had with reallocation of some of the state aid and the potential additional, amount, plus we can still have the conversation on bridge or no pedestrian bridge or no pedestrian bridge. I still think option 2 is better than not pursuing any bonding request.
I would agree that it's better than not pursuing any bonding request, but we just got done, paying $485,000 for additional work at the airport because of a cost overrun. And if this becomes a cost overrun, how much does that come out to, at 20% or 10%, whatever that number is? And that's why I think going in at the 100%, understanding that at some point we may have to contribute.
Yeah.
State paying for it is better than city paying for it.
And I think you're deep into project logistics, that at this point, we're still looking for city or, state of Minnesota, do we have an opportunity to partner? And if so, then you proceed down all of those contingencies and all of, get actual quotes in of what individual portions of that project's going to look like, and you can manage those individually. But I still think there's some attractiveness to bundling them together.
Mr. Mayor, I'd make a motion that we'd opt for option number 1 and see what the state of Minnesota has to say about that, and go for the total package.
I would second.
Got a motion? We got a second? Any further discussion?
Just one minor nit comment is we're looking for opportunities to improve some of the facts of the case or kind of putting together the case on why this should be considered. One number we might want to consider adding is the amount of commercial traffic that Highway 97 and how much commerce gets supported. I know in my business, safety of commercial vehicles right now is at an all-time low. And so whatever we can do to make make commerce safer and more efficient, I think that also has strong public support or opportunity for strong public support.
All right, any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Item E, bid award. Ryan? Or, Aaron, I guess you're, Ryan.
Ryan.
It is you.
Mayor, City Council, in your packet are their quotes results and a recommendation of award for Trunk Highway 61 West Ditch tile improvements. Just a little background on that. Obviously, this is related to the drainage issue that we've been dealing with. I believe it started, back in 2006, 7. Mayor Winning's been on site with the property owners a couple times. Staff has certainly been involved. There's a lot of things going on here, but alternatively, that we found some grade that we could play with that could improve the water that's ponding in this area, and right now currently has to drain down the east side of 61. So with that and kind of working on what you see within your packet, we've also applied for the Urban Stormwater Remediation Cost Share Program. Just a little correction in my packet. I did confirm though that is will award cover cost 50% of eligible costs up to a maximum 24.8. Basically, that was our 50% of our estimates. Obviously, our estimate came in higher than the quotes received, so our construction cost is 32. So 50% of that hopefully would be covered by the Rice Creek, plus the soft costs up to 50% as well. So we can track that separately. That determination will be finalized Wednesday morning at the watershed, where they're holding a public hearing on the funds, along with some other projects and other permits. So, as many questions as I asked, you think they would have told me you aren't going to get it. So I'm pretty confident that we will receive that money. But, as I stated in the award letter, that you guys could award the project contingent on the watershed approving their share Wednesday morning. So that's plenty of time for us to move forward. But the work's required to be completed before Thanksgiving. Basically, we're extending almost 1,300 feet of drain tile pipe that will be constructed over the top of the private drain tile, and then it'll flow into the existing ditch in 61 where grade becomes apparent. Reason the drain tile is put here instead of ditching, previously we did do some ditching quotes in here and we're well in the 6 figures and we received those. It's just a lot amount of dirt in here, so you certainly see a wide range of bids. Lots of that comes down to the equipment some of these guys have or don't have, or familiar working within MnDOT right away. Pretty easy job if you got the right equipment. So that's where we're at. Also, something that's going to be occurring too is the property owner is reaching out to some of these contractors that we provided contact with as they need to extend their own drain tile at their own project on the east side of 61. You can kind of see it on your screen right now on the left side where the water just below the hand now. So she'll be working with a contractor there to extend that drain tile as well out to that area that she got a no-loss permit application approved by Rice Creek Watershed District that'll allow her to bring that drain tile at a particular elevation that will help her, but then also the property owner to the north. So with that, I guess if there's any more information requests, I certainly can provide it. Otherwise, we'll recommend that the City Council award the project to the lowest bidder, Dressel Contracting Incorporated, in the amount of $32,050 contingent on the watershed being authorized to participate in the costs that we previously discussed.
Did you have a question, Mike? Go ahead. Ryan, I got a question on the drain tile itself and or possibly sizing, but there's currently some water issues at the airport itself with the new runways and that. Would this tile ever be able to utilize that to drain some of those areas, or are we just too far away from it?
These totally separate projects.
Yeah, they're,
So this drain tile that's used to, I guess, anticipated or used to go through where the hangars have been constructed now, obviously has been severed several times with the construction of the water main and sanitary sewer to serve those. And that's when then Rice Creek came up. 2008 or 9 with the drain tile to the south, that's much higher. This provides positive drainage, really takes the water back to where originally the original drain tile did, to Clear Lake, before it then comes out and drains. Right now, we're draining, basically to JD4, which is taking some volume that previously didn't go that way until man made it go that way. So now this will take it back to the way it originally drained. But yeah, totally two different projects. Runways much way farther away. That'll be a different thing to deal with. This will specifically deal with what we've been dealing here with these property owners and get the water out of there.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry, go ahead if anybody, I was
No,
going to make a
it was-
motion, so.
Anybody else?
the bid sounds good. There's a big spread in the prices there too. It's amazing.
Russell's right
So-
there, so that really makes that easier. Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we approve the project to the lowest bidder, Dressel Contracting, in the amount of $32,050, contingent upon the watershed approving their cost participation.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. And Dan, deputy clerk hiring?
Yeah, just 1 second. Mayor, members of the council, we recently completed the recruitment process for the deputy clerk position here in the city. And during the recruitment process, we received 48 applications for the position. And the process consisted of testing the top-ranked candidates through 2 rounds of testing. So every candidate that was top-ranked went through 2 rounds of testing. We also did a first round of in-person interviews and then a second round of in-person interviews. So it's quite an extensive process from that perspective. Based on all of that, the decision was made to make a conditional job offer to Bailey Fensel. The offer was contingent upon city council approval, positive background checks, and passing a criminal background check. She has had positive reference checks that has been completed, and she has completed the criminal background check as well. Bailey currently works as a casualty claims adjuster for American Family Insurance, where she's in charge of investigating insurance claims, reviewing estimates, and issuing claim checks. She's also worked as a business development intern for an e-commerce startup company. And part of her responsibilities there was she managed the memberships for the organizations and then tracked lead activity using CRM software. And then she currently holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Madison. And if approved, her anticipated start date is the first week of November. I don't have that finalized yet because she still needed to finalize that with her current employer, but is looking at the first week of November for an anticipated start date. The recommendation from staff is to approve the hiring of Bailey Fensel as the new deputy city clerk for the city of Forest Lake at grade 5, step 3. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
How do you come up with what grade, what step? How do we?
Each
calculate
position
that?
has its own grade, and then within that, there's steps based on current, what she currently makes. There's negotiation standpoints that happens in there, so. But each position is currently graded out and when we list the position.
Okay. Any other questions?
So we have a candidate that does not have municipal experience. What does that onboarding plan look like, or opportunities to get her up to speed? Clearly, there's a fair amount of compliance and.
Yeah, I'll be working with her
Specificity, no.
extensively on the onboard, and we have a training program that we're already starting to work internally through to kind of get her the experiences that she needs. But when we looked at her as a candidate, I mean, I'm going to be working with her closely to get her up to speed. And, given what we kind of saw in the application process and the interviews, I mean, I think she'll pick up very quickly on it. Her reference checks as well, I did kind of try to parse it out a little bit, and they all were when I kind of gave them a job description, very positive towards she'd be a great fit for the position.
All right.
I make a motion that we approve the hiring of Bailey Fensel as deputy city clerk, grade 5, step 3.
We have a second on that?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right.
I'll ask my question. When did the council vote to approve you guys moving forward with this hire?
Well, Mayor and Council, again, this was kind of in that same timeframe prior to the, what I anticipate a policy shift as far as that goes. And so, similar to what we previously talked about, we did send an email out with indication that there had been a resignation, but also, that we were going to move ahead and post a position as currently, budgeted, and then ask for any feedback on that. So we understand going forward, the council would like to authorize the recruitment for positions, and that'll be our working plan going ahead. So
Thank you, because I do think it's transparency to the public to actually have that happen, so thank you.
All right. 7G, the Winnick Supply invoices.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to pay the Winnick Supply invoices.
I'll second.
All right, motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And one abstain. Moving on to staff updates. Dave, anything from you?
The compost is up and running, and there's a couple hundred cars a day. We've hauled 50 loads of compost in the last 2 weeks, so it's ramping up.
All right, thank you. Chief Peterson?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and City Council members, I have a couple items for you. In the past 3 to 4 weeks, we have observed a significant increase in thefts from motor vehicles and thefts of motor vehicles. These thefts are not only happening in Forest Lake, but all around the North metro area. And we're working diligently with surrounding agencies on these thefts, sharing information and evidence in order to try and solve these crimes. I just want to remind all residents and visitors to lock their vehicles' doors, keep valuables out of their vehicles, and either park their vehicles in their garages, if they have one, or park in a well-lit area if possible. If anyone happens to be a victim of a theft, please make sure they contact the police department and make a report. This is really important because it helps us in tracking the movements of where the crimes are occurring. And secondly, on October 26th, which is this Thursday, Forest Lake police officers will once again be participating in Tip a Cop at Famous Dave's. Officers will be working with Special Olympics athletes to assist Famous Dave's staff in serving food, bussing tables, and visiting with customers. 100% of all the tips and donations the officers receive are given to Minnesota Special Olympics. And that will be held from 5:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. And that's all I have for you, unless you have some questions for me.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the chief? Donovan?
Mayor, members of council, the Comprehensive Plan Task Force met last Tuesday night. The subject was to look at some draft goals and also pull out the maps and sort of throw out some ideas, some concepts. And we also discussed the results of some of the results that you had received at your, the comprehensive plan workshop update on that Monday night last week, and also scheduled a fourth task force meeting for the end of November to continue that discussion before we begin to take a broader community discussion approach to again start developing these draft goals and policies.
All right. Any questions for Donovan? Dan?
I have no updates unless you have questions of me.
All right. Aaron?
no reports.
All right. Jay?
I have nothing.
All right. Ryan?
Lift station project will start this week, right out here at 6C. Wear course should be done being paved by noon tomorrow in town, so that'll wrap up the paving year. So a lot of still stuff going on, private work, so.
Is the quality of the paving what we expected, or finally?
Obviously with density tests, we'll test the cores for density a couple days later, but we haven't had any issues to date, so.
All right, thank you. Sam?
I attended the fire department open house with the grandkids here a few days ago, and that was a great thing, the helicopter and all that kind of stuff. And it was a good turnout, I thought. Got to visit with several different people and talked to a lot of the firefighters and that sort of thing. And then the other thing that I attended was the school district meeting. And that was a fairly short meeting. It was basically pay the bills and that kind of thing. And of course, they're talking about the get out the vote thing and vote yes for the bond that's coming up. So on November 7th. And that was the only two things I had to report on.
And I think early voting's open now for anybody
Early
that wants
voting's
to,
up,
right?
yep.
All right.
The only thing I have, I tried to attend the open house for the fire department, and I got there unfortunately a little bit late. I spent a half hour discussing some items with the chief, actually, and I gained a lot of information that I didn't know about the fire department and some of their equipment. So even though I got there a little late, it was time well spent. Al Newman did tell me that he thought there were anywhere from 750 to 800 people that did attend, so that's fantastic. I'm sorry I missed the smokehouse. I didn't see what that was all about, but I would have loved to have seen some kids coming in and out of there, because it was great education, especially for the young folks that were there. That's about all.
All right. I have no updates this week, so pass them on.
So, first of all, I'd like to formally request that we have a special meeting to discuss litigation over the airport project. I know I've brought this up probably 5 or 6 times already, and I'd like to finally get this at least being discussed. The Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission this last week was canceled. Fire Board meeting on the 30th, and then we're looking to also schedule a Personnel Committee meeting here coming up in the next week or two. That's it.
Thank you.
No
right.
updates this evening.
All right. So we are now going to move into a closed session.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we move into closed session pursuant to Minnesota State Statute 13D.05, Subdivision 3B for attorney-client privilege discussion on pending litigation.
All right, we've got a motion. Do we have a second?
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.